Take Command Podcast. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson. One more question on our way out. If we did not get to your question today and you submitted it, especially if I responded to your either email or DM and was like, this is going in the mailbag, I promise I am not going to push off your question forever. We just didn't get to it today, but there's another mailbag next week, so we'll get to it then. And if you want to submit new questions, then you can do that as well at Hoffman.sports on Instagram or HoffmanShow.com, or you can hit up Logan at Logan_Paulson82. Last one we're going to tackle today, though, Logan, comes from Bryce, who said a bunch of nice things about the podcast that I'm not going to read, but Bryce, I see them. Thank you. First, is there any reason why some folks are hesitant to give Terry his flowers? Even among a handful of local media types, there seems to be this hesitation to acknowledge him as a bona fide top 10 wide receiver in the NFL. Outside of maybe Chase, Jefferson, and Hill, I think his traits and production warrant top 10 status. I understand his size and strength aren't top tier, but his speed, play strength, hands, and playmaking are all very elite. I've always kind of scratched my head a little bit with that. I realize it's inherently subjective, but the dude has delivered for 6 seasons now and only recently has a QB to be excited about. I love this question because this has kind of been where I've been on Terry for a long time. So I'm selfish and biased as hell here because this is some level of confirmation bias in the premise of the question, Logan. But I think that there are not 10 guys I would take over Terry McLaurin in the NFL at receiver. There might be like 6 or 7. There might be 8 or 9 even. I'd have to go through and make an actual list. Yeah. But when you talk about the speed, and especially Terry this year, like, He finally did the thing I've been waiting on since his rookie year, where he like takes a slant. And he did it in the playoff game, right? Takes a slant and is gone. And you're like, oh, well, we knew that was in there somewhere. But apparently, like, he had talked about how in the past when he would catch stuff like that, he would start looking back and making sure that he didn't get caught that way. And that actually just slowed him down. And this year he was just like, I'm going to run. And nobody caught him. You have the over-the-top stuff, the toughness on slants, and all the things that he does, not to mention who he is and what he brings to a locker room. There just aren't 10 guys I can imagine taking over Terry McLaurin, even if he goes about it sometimes in what feels like an unorthodox way, like the almost awkwardness that he catches the ball with sometimes. But when it comes down to it, like, this is his first year that he's had a real NFL quarterback for the entire season, and his production was one of the best in the league. So I'm not going to sit here and fight with imaginary people. I don't know who actually has been saying stuff about Terry like this, but I certainly am ready to give Terry any flower that he would like as a top 10 receiver in the NFL.
No, I think that's totally fair, especially after this season. He's been extremely productive. I think just to give some context to the question, like, yeah, Terry's a really good player, right? But I do think that, like, if you were to do a draft of receivers and just say every receiver in the NFL is in this draft and you could pick them out, I'm not sure when it's all settled based on physical traits, Terry would be in a top 10. And so what I mean by that is, like, when you're looking at elite wide receivers, right? I think Justin Jefferson's a really good example. Like, he is a tremendous separator. And when I'm looking at evaluating receivers, right, the separation metric, I think PFF does it, I think True Media does one too, is a huge factor in that, specifically versus man-to-man coverage. And so the guys that you just mentioned, Chase, Jefferson, Hill, they have crazy separation metrics. Like, and they can win in the slot, they can win outside, they can win in a multitude of ways. They can win versus man coverage, and they just are special players. You know, they all have pretty good quarterbacks too. I think that's another thing to keep in mind here. Terry has always been a very, like, statistically a very low separator, right? He doesn't get separation at a super high level. He's not this guy that's going to be super sudden at the top of his route. Like, he's going to be in a spot. He's going to be very competitive at the catch point. He's going to make plays, and that's his superpower. And so I think that's maybe, and again, I'm just making an assumption here based on when you look at the data, because again, like, he's a good football, but I don't think anybody's saying Terry's a bad football player. But in terms of that,
I think it's the reluctance to call him an elite receiver that bothers some fans. And I think this year he kind of put that to bed.
Yeah. And I think to me, it would be if you're looking for one thing to say, like, why he gets this criticism, it's the fact that he's not like a true top shelf separator, you know. And I think like when I was around like DeAndre Hopkins in Houston, or when I was around Julio Jones in Atlanta, or even when I was around Alshon Jeffrey in Chicago, like, those guys are really good separators, and at points in their career were like true ones, and they just kind of do it differently. They're big, they're strong, they're fast, they're kind of always open. And Terry this year is definitely kind of moving in that direction. But I think there are times like where, again, that lack of elite suddenness, and again, like his superpower lies elsewhere. Like I love how you articulated what he does well, right? He's a tremendous worker. He's good in the building. He's got good vertical speed. He's great in contested catch situations. Like that, like maybe if you combined all those things, make a 1, right? But it doesn't look like your traditional like horsepower 1 receiver. And I think that's where this conversation kind of gets a little bit convoluted, if that makes sense.
Right. And the thing is about the separation is that matters a lot more if you're not the best contested catcher in the NFL.
Right.
And like that was the difference this year was he had a quarterback who implicitly trusted him and was like, I don't care if he doesn't look open, because the definition of open, and not even the definition of open, the definition of Terry's in a position to catch the football, whether he's open or not is irrelevant, is a very different definition than if you insert almost any other guy in the league. Like his hands, his play strength is so high that he overcomes that weakness in his game. And you can call it a weakness if you want to, but it doesn't actually hurt him because of the contested catch ability. I'm just going to start naming names. Guys that are in consideration here. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, I think unquestionably, those are the two best receivers in football. Like no one's taken them. I'm just going to go down the receiving yards per game. Brian Thomas was actually third in the NFL in receiving yards per game this year.
He's a beast this year.
He was incredible. And
I think that's a good. I'm glad you brought that up. That up because he's a guy that looks the part. And so when you're doing this receiver draft, you're like, here's a dude who's 6'3.5". He's 210 pounds. He runs a 4.3 40. He's got this kind of silky movement skill. He's quick in the short area. Like that's a guy, like if you're just drafting people might say, oh, I prefer Brian Thomas Jr. because of those other things. Now, his production this year is inflated because they were bad. Your quarterback gets hurt and they're forcing him targets, but that's a different conversation. So my point is like, that's, I think, a good point of comparison. You got a guy who's got, like, I don't want to say everything, but a lot of the stuff that, like, traditional ones have. And then Terry, he's 6 foot, he's 200 pounds. Again, like, it's not the same as this over here, but it's still effective because of the reasons you laid out.
For sure. Drake London, on some levels, in the same category, a more advanced version, although he's not nearly as fast as Brian Thomas, because Brian Thomas is a freak. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think you probably comfortably take over Terry. One of the few guys, now multiple years, AP, All-Pro, first team, like, okay, fine. Jerry Jeudy, like, I would take Terry. Malik Neighbors, okay, for age adjustment, I would take Malik. But, like, right now, I still might take Terry, just a veteran know-how. CeeDee Lamb, at his best, I think he's closer to that Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson category. Vlad McConkey was actually 10th in the NFL this year.
He was tremendous this year. He was amazing this year.
Trey McBride, tight end, so he's off the board. Jackson Smith and Jigba. Garrett Wilson, I think from a talent standpoint, you'd have to consider him. And then Terry's next. Other guys down the list: A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams, Zay Flowers, like Nico Collins. Like it's close. So Terry is a top 10 guy.
Let me just say this to you. So one of the smartest scouts that I've ever talked to. So much respect for this guy. He's been doing it for a long time. We have a conversation. I was like, isn't it kind of easy to do receivers to evaluate them and get kind of what you want? He's like, I think it's one of the harder positions. And I said, well, why? Because can they get open in the short, like the things I just talked about, right? He's like, what you'll find is that coaches want different stuff, right? And so like what a 1 is for me might not be a 1 for Craig. And so when you go down this list, like Chase, Jefferson, Brian Thomas Jr., Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown, they're all different. Like Chase is like 6'1", Justin Jefferson is like 6 foot, Amon-Ra St. Brown's like 5'10", but Amon-Ra St. Brown in this offense, in Terry's role, is not as good as Terry. And Terry in Amon-Ra St. Brown's role is not as good as Amon-Ra St. Brown. They're different players. They have different strengths. And I think that's one thing that I look at here is there's no player very few players that are scheme agnostic. Maybe Justin Jefferson, maybe Chase, right? That's why they're up there, right? Maybe CeeDee Lamb, but even he's got some kind of limitation. He's like, doesn't have the vertical horsepower, right? But what I'm saying is like, when the coach can identify what you're good at, you can elevate to kind of this number 1 category, right? I even think like Drake London, who I love Drake London. I love watching him play. Love how physical he is, but he's not a true, like, to me, true, like, one, he's like a kind of a Z. You can move him around the formation. He can play the slide. He can play outside. But in terms of like that Julio model, not quite like that. But in that system, is he the one? 100%. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's where this conversation, I'm glad the question kind of articulated, it is subjective, but it's also scheme and role and usage dependent. So if I want a vertical based offense like this was last year where Terry's taking a lot of vertical shots, like I'm going to take Terry over Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's just better at that skill set, right? If we're going to run a lot of slants as a true X, Terry's better at it than St. Brown. But if we're going to run a lot of choices and like a lot of like reverses and a lot of kind of in the slot Z type stuff, definitively Amon-Ra St. Brown, if that makes sense, right? It's just he's better at it. So I think understanding uses, understanding strengths can elevate players in a way that is often, I think it's hard for fans to understand.
For sure. And then the last thing I'll just add too, because this guy's here, I'm going to blow up the comment section because this name has been coming up a lot too. DK Metcalf is apparently once out in Seattle, and like everyone's like, oh, he's perfect. He's big, physical. I'm like, he is big. He doesn't play big. Terry plays way bigger than DK Metcalf. And so like, just because a guy on paper, like this is the beauty of Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas is 6'3" with a 4.3 40, and he plays like he's 6'3" with a 4.3 40. That dude is a freak. Yeah. And he plays like it. DK plays like Amon-Ra St. Brown, but he's not nearly as good at it.
He plays, he plays like? He plays like a speed receiver. He plays like a vertical route.
He doesn't play like Amon-Ra. Like he plays like he's Amon-Ra St. Brown's size. He plays like Jameson Williams, but he's not nearly as fast as Jameson Williams.
That's exactly like his role is. He runs vertical routes. He runs posts, and he's good at them. He's good at those routes,
he's
right?
Very good. But like he's not a big physical at the catch point, like monster kind of. Like he'll have a couple of highlights per year like that, but like on a consistent basis, that's not who he is. And so it's kind of a do you know ball test when I get these comments on stuff of like, go get DK. They need a big receiver. Like I want DK over T Higgins. Like T Higgins plays like he's 6'4" and is a big ass receiver. DK Metcalf does not.
What I will say about DK, like just we're taking a what is this a
detour?
Two forks stuff. Yeah, detour. Thank you. We're taking a detour here, but I do think DK would be a good fit here because of the vertical speed. Like one of the things about we've had criticisms of in this offense is there's nobody that like pushes the cap. If you want a guy to push the cap, he can push the cap now. You know what I'm saying? In a way that T. Higgins might not be able to. And I think he's going to be way more cost effective than T. Higgins in terms of price.
Well, depending on what you have to give up in terms of draft capital. But
Correct. But that's kind of what I'm saying is again, we talked about role, right? If your role is to run vertical and win 50-50s and play down the field, like that's like I think about DK. What was that, 2 years ago when he was kind of at the peak of his powers and Seattle really understood what he was good at. We're not running a lot of underneath, we're going to run crossing routes. We're going to run deep crossing routes. We're going to run posts. We're going to run goes. Like
stuff that is running, not cutting.
Correct. Like let's run and not cut. And I think Cliff's smart enough to understand what that brings, right? But to your point, he's not going to like moss everybody. He doesn't track the ball that way. T. Higgins tracks the ball like a big receiver, like think Mike Evans, right? Like that's maybe the archetype right now. They track the ball differently. They play basketball with the football. That's why Drake London's good because he has this great ball tracking skill. And so if that's what you're expecting, if you're a coach that's signing DK Metcalf to be a ball winning 50-50 receiver, that's a mistake. That's not what he's good at, right? And I think that's kind of what you're getting to here is like Terry's better at that than he is because he tracks the ball like a big receiver does.
Right. By the way, I'm also DK's the personality a little enigmatic.
Yes.
I'm out. On
I mean,
DK
we're just talking
X's
and O's here.
But I'm just putting that for the record. That's on me. That's not on Logan. I
agree. That's one of those things like where everyone's like Tyreek Hill. Would Tyreek Hill be a great fit here from a football standpoint? Yeah. Absolutely. But it's like, is he a commander? I don't know. There's a couple guys on this list that are commanders that I would die to get, but again, they're not going anywhere. So you know what I mean?
Yeah. But we will get into some more names that are available coming up in the next couple of episodes. I know some of the questions we got were specific to certain guys. We're going to take the time to watch the tape on those, but we will get to them. Again, if you want to submit your mailbag questions, I've told you 3 times in this podcast how to do it, so go back and listen. Do that. We're done for today, though. So, Logan, thank you, as always, for spreading your knowledge to the universe. My name is Craig Hoffman. I'll be on the radio today, 4 to 7, and tomorrow, 4 to 7, and you guys get it. Check it out on the Team 980 for the Hoffman Show. For Logan, I'm Craig. We'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.